Good evening. On behalf of North Texas Peace Advocates, an ad hoc group of veteran and student peace activists, welcome to a webinar that will take a deep dive into the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and what you can do to help. I'm your MC for the evening, Samina Karmali. Our speakers this evening are Dr. Aisha Jumaan of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, Hassan Al-Tayeb of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and a much heralded leader of the peace community in the United States, Kathy Kelly. We will also hear from Symbol Aurangzeb, District Project Coordinator in the Office of Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. We are grateful to our coalition partners, Amnesty International Dallas, Pax Christi Dallas, Peace Mennonite Church Dallas, the SMU Human Rights Program, and Kinder USA for their support. One reminder before we get started, this is, if you could, because we were intending to do a webinar, but we're going to put you all on your honor to keep your microphones muted. If you have questions, please put it in the chat, and we'll pick up those questions at the end. And also in the chat, I'll be putting our speakers' names and titles, as well as a few selected links to articles and websites that our speakers have referenced. Our first speaker, Dr. Aisha Jumaan, is the president of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Dr. Jumaan has a master's of public health and a PhD in epidemiology, over 30 years of experience in public health, and she has worked around the globe with a focus on maternal and child health, as well as working with vaccines. She is currently coordinating health projects in Yemen. Dr. Jumaan.
Thank you very much, Samina. An honor to be with all of you here. May I have access to share screen? Hadi?
Yeah, I'm going to try to do that, Dr. Jumaan.
Okay, great.
Just give me a second. Believe me, this is the first time I'm doing this. Oh my God. Learning on the job. Let's see.
Dr. Jumaan, I think you can share your screen, Dr. Jumaan, if you have your slides.
Yeah, I can't share the screen. If you just go to share screen and do multiple, Hadi, I will have access.
I'm trying to find where I do that. And
It's at the bottom. So next to chat, there is a share screen option.
No, not that.
So you'll have participants, chat, share screen.
Yeah, I'm looking for it, Dr. Jumaan. I'm not seeing
Okay.
it.
Is it at the bottom?
All I see is invite and those three little dots, nothing else.
Are you looking at the top or at the bottom?
At the bottom, yeah.
Do you see your microphone?
No, I don't. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, Hadi, if you move over my name, do you see any three dots or something pop up that you can make me the co-host?
Oh, okay. All right. Let me see.
Mouse over my name.
Yeah. Okay. It says co-host. Make co-host. Okay. I just did.
Okay. But I still, hold on. Maybe it didn't take yet. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Samina, did you share the slides from your end?
Yes. Can you see? You should
just
be able to
allow
see
me
them.
I actually did some updates.
Okay.
I tend to do that. Can you just give me the share capability so I can share from my end?
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Otherwise, if that's not, okay, perfect. That's fine. I can go with this, your slide. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I think maybe Hadi has the ability to make you a host if he can do that.
That's no, this is fine. Why don't we use the slides that you have?
Okay. So, but you can't see them.
No, I
Can
can
you?
see them.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Oh, of course.
Okay, great.
Just that I made some updates today.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right. Can you see it now?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll be presenting on the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and the impact on population health. Next slide, please. Perfect. So usually I like to start with a picture of Sana'a. This is the city where I grew up in. And the reason I want to share the city of Sana'a is to show that Yemen, first of all, is a beautiful place. And second of all, is that it has a lot of culture and history. Sana'a is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. And it's, existed for thousands of years, almost 5,000 years. Next slide, please. In this slide, what we're looking at is the number of people who are in need, and they are grouped based on UN data. So food insecurity, we have 16.2 million people in Yemen who are currently food insecure, 2.1 million people who have no access to health, 15.4 million people who don't have access to clean water, and 15.8 million people who lack access to protection. Next slide, please. So there are multiple factors that impact population health in Yemen. And for today's presentation, I'm just going to focus on the blockade that is on Yemen that was set by the Saudi-led coalition in March 2015. So we're in the 7th year of the blockade. This is a publication from 2019, and it's Robert Worth basically saying Yemen under siege. And Yemen has been under siege since, again, March 2015. This is a war tactic that was used in the Middle Ages, and it's unfortunate and heartbreaking for the Yemeni people that Yemen is under siege for over 6 years now. Next slide, please. In this slide, and this I had an updated slide. It's called. This is a UN system, and it's called a commodity tracking system to Yemen. It shows what gets into Yemen, and here we're looking at food import and at fuel import. And the reason I wanted to show you this slide is to show that Yemeni do not control what gets into the country. It's the Saudi-led coalition determines what gets into Yemen. So that's what that slide was about. And it goes from March 2015. This slide goes to September 2020, but the situation is the same. Depending on where the Saudis allow to get in, that's what gets into Yemen. Next slide, please. In this one, I show the food import in Yemen, and you will see, there are times when Yemen gets 76% of what it needs, and sometimes it increases. But again, there is a lot of variation, and it's not in the hand of the Yemeni people, but rather in the hand of the Saudi-led coalition. And this went up to January of 2020. And as you can see, in December, only 58% of what Yemen needs was allowed into the country. And the straight line is what Yemen needs per month. Next slide, please. This is a recent publication, and it shows that one child dying every 75 seconds in Yemen on brink of biggest famine in history. This is just so unacceptable in today's day and age. We're on the 21st century, and yet Yemeni kids and Yemeni are being starved. They're not starving, they are being starved to the effect that every 75 seconds, a Yemeni child dies of hunger. Next slide, please. This is David Beasley. David Beasley is the World Food Program chief. He was also the governor of South Carolina. He visited Yemen in March, and this is what he said. Yemeni are starving for food, for fuel, for medical supplies, for hope. Again, without the blockade on Yemen, I mean, the war is going on. There are many wars going on around the globe. It's the siege, it's the blockade that's silently killing a lot of people in Yemen. Next slide, please. This is UN Chief Mark Lowcock. These are some statements that he had said in a recent publication that was UN publication. He said, Yemen is speeding toward the worst famine the world has seen in decades. 16 million people in Yemen were going hungry, and 5 million of those people are just one step away from famine. 400,000 children under the age 5 are severely malnourished. Those children are in their last weeks and months. And when he said that, it was around March 12th. We are now in April 5. I assume that some of these 400,000 children have already died from famine. They are starving to death. In a recent briefing at the UN Security Council, also Mark Lowcock said that Yemen is being blocked, and so blocked all commercial fuel imports to Hodeidah, where more than half of Yemen fuels imports come in. Fuel prices have doubled or tripled, pushing up prices of food and healthcare and everything else. Reports of health facilities closing down in the last several weeks. So a lot of the health facilities are no longer able to keep the services because of the lack of fuel, and many others had to reduce the number of hours they can serve. 13 fuel ships waiting outside Hodeidah carrying enough supplies for about 2 months have not been allowed into Yemen. On average, those ships have been waiting more than 80 days. What that means also is the Yemeni have to pay for the fee of the delay of these ships. All of them have been inspected and cleared by the UN verification and inspection mechanism. So this is what the UN chief is telling the UN Security Council. Next slide, please. This is a CN report that really brought more attention to what Yemeni are experiencing. It says, first fuel ship this year docks in Hodeidah, a Saudi-led coalition relaxes blockade. So one fuel ship they allowed into Yemen after the uproar and all the UN organizations calling on them to let the fuel in. Next slide, please. This is a publication that came out at the end of March of this year. This is, again, a UN publication, and I'm going to be talking about some of what they published in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So here it talks about the persistent fuel shortages in Yemen that undercut humanitarian operations and exacerbates humanitarian needs. So for North Yemen, there is a crippling fuel shortages since June of 2020. So since June of 2020, the Saudis have not allowed a lot of fuel to get into the country. The population is struggling to access essential services, whether it's water services, whether it's health services, impacting aid groups' ability to deliver humanitarian aid as well. That also had resulted in increased fuel prices up to 3 times what they normally are, which means then increased in food and water prices. So for example, for us, Yemen Relief, we distribute food baskets. Now the food baskets are, for us, they are 60% higher than what we used to buy. But in addition to that, now we have to pay a lot more for the distribution and the trucks to move the food to those who are in need. And of course, that means that a lot of people are going to go hungry. In January 2021, only 4 commercial fuel tankers were allowed in. In February, no fuel vessels were permitted to enter Hodeidah. Can I see the next one, please? And no commercial fuel were allowed. As of 29 March, only 1 fuel was allowed in. So there are 10 fuel ships that have received UN certification to get into Yemen. However, they are still held by the Saudi-led coalitions. These vessels have been held for over 72 days, again, increasing costs that will be passed to Yemenis. So every day the ship is not allowed to dock in Yemen, that we have to pay fees for that. And those fees are accumulated and passed to the Yemeni population. No commercial fuel entered Hodeidah for 52 days, 28 January to 21 March, alarming that because half of the fuel that comes into Yemen gets through Hodeidah. So field report, this is from UN agencies in Yemen, indicate that fuel shortages are impacting also commercial activity. Transportation of food to markets has increased, a threat to undercut availability of clean water because they need that to power the pumps, and increase waterborne outbreaks, including cholera. Next slide, please. So this is another CNN report. It says famine has arrived in pockets of Yemen. Saudi ships blocking fuel aren't helping. Next slide, please. This is a monitor that shows the ships that have received UN certification to get into Yemen. So it has the name of the ship, the type of cargo, gasoline or diesel, and then the permit number from the UN and the permit issue date. So for example, if you look at number 1, the Manjun here, it has gasoline. The permit was given to them in April 22. So it's been held for 318 days. That's almost a year. Same thing with a lot of these ships. There are 2 ships on the list here that the owners decided that they're not going to wait anymore and left, and they're not going to wait and dock in Yemen anymore. Next slide, please. This one again from the tracking system that I mentioned, and it shows you what was allowed to get into Yemen. So if we look at the gray line, it's what Yemen needs every month from fuel. So that's 544,000 metric tons of fuel. In the red is what was allowed to get into Yemen. In green is percent of that. So we can see that Yemen, for example, in September, received 4% of what they need. In June, they received 1% of what they need. And we know in February, they received 0. Next slide, please. This one is more updated, and it shows all the way to March of this year. So you can see that in February, there was nothing that was allowed in. And towards the end of March, only 3,000 of the 544,000 metric tons that's needed was allowed in addition to 0 that was allowed in February. Next slide, please. The next, I'm going to be talking about at least 2 diseases that are affected by water-borne diseases. Next slide, please. This shows the cholera in Yemen. Yemen is experiencing the largest cholera outbreak in the world with over 2.3 million suspected. Again, this is totally unacceptable. And you combine cholera that causes diarrhea and dehydration with malnutrition, and you have a very deadly disease. Next slide, please. This one shows dengue. Dengue fever is a result of storage of water in safe places. And we know that water is a problem in Yemen. And so if we look at years 2018, 2019, and 2020, as the situation worsened, we see the number of suspected dengue cases increased from 27,000 to 63,000 in 2020. Next slide, please. Now I'll talk about the COVID resurgence in Yemen. Next slide, please. So this is from MSF, which is Doctors Without Borders. Basically, the title of this article says that the Yemeni hospitals are no longer able to deal with the resurgence of COVID cases, which started March of this year. Next slide, please. Here, I want to show an overview. Of course, not all of Yemen is reporting COVID-19 cases. Only a few governorates are, but there are a total of 4,800 cases with a mortality of 947, which is almost a fourth which is the highest in the world. If we look at healthcare workers who are affected, we have 382 healthcare workers in a country that is really struggling with the healthcare system. So that is quite a bit for Yemen. Next slide, please. Here, I want to show the number of COVID cases in Yemen, and just to show the sharp peak from starting in March. So can you go up a little bit? I want to show the axis down. Yes. So if we see the number of cases where the first case started in April of last year, we saw a slope that was like this. So in March of this year, there were 2,000 cases. So between March and April 5, we've seen more than doubling in cases, which means the new variant of COVID-19 is now in Yemen, and which means also that the health system is going to be overwhelmed. Next slide, please. This also the same thing, but this shows the number of fatality. And again, we were at 621 by the end of March, in March, and now we are at 947, which is quite a bit. Next slide, please. This is the impact in terms of the population. A lot of people in Yemen are more concerned about hunger than they are about COVID-19 because they feel that, and at least based on information we get when we distribute food in Yemen, a lot of families have told us they would rather die of COVID-19 than dying of, they would rather die of COVID-19 than die of hunger, because that will be a faster death. Next slide, please. This is our Yemen Foundation. I just wanted to show you what we do. We were started in 2017 in response to the war in Yemen, and our mission was to increase awareness of the US public and policymakers about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which we're doing. We also support relief and reconstruction efforts in Yemen and facilitate peace activities. Next slide, please. I hope that we count on you all to stop the war in Yemen. Thank you. That's my last slide.
Thank you, Dr. Jumaan. And thanks to everyone who has been patiently bearing with us through our technical learning process. It's very difficult to comprehend how things in Yemen have gotten this bad, with basic needs being unmet in our modern age. Our next speaker, Ms. Kathy Kelly, will shed some light on how things have gotten to this point. Kathy Kelly is an American peace activist, pacifist, and author, one of the founding members of Voices in the Wilderness, and has won so many awards and prizes and so much recognition over her 50 years of activism that it would be impossible for me to do justice to introduce her in such a brief introduction. But I do want to mention, as many of you know, her over 24 trips to Iraq, several visits to Afghanistan, and her recent peace walks here in the United States. Her latest articles have focused on the experiences of Afghan and Yemeni people facing the consequences of US military and economic warfare. Ms. Kelly will discuss US involvement in Yemen and the US's action and inaction in the region. Kathy?
Well, Samina, thank you very much for that introduction. And may I say to Aisha that I know you wanted to update so you'd be immediately updated for today, but you've been doing that every day since I heard of you, and I'm sure much sooner, as a noted epidemiologist, but also as one of the most caring people I can imagine. I would like people to know that way back in 2017, a group of people thought, well, maybe we could go to Yemen. We just did not understand how thoroughly closed off Yemen was. But as we tried to figure it out, Aisha immediately volunteered to accompany us. And of course, that trip never happened because this pernicious and cruel blockade does not allow entrance into Yemen. Even Nima al-Bagher, who did the very stunning CNN recent report about the suffering being caused by the blockade, had to smuggle herself into the country by boat, risking attacks from the US supplied naval ships that go all along the coastline. Samina, thank you for mentioning that I had gone to Iraq. And I'm sorry to say to this group, many of whom worked so hard to end the economic sanctions against Iraq, that one conclusion I drew from the 13 years of economic sanctions that brutally and lethally punished Iraqi children is that the US has been capable of saying in its foreign policy to other countries all around the world, if you do not subordinate yourselves to fulfill our national interest, we will kill thousands upon thousands of your children. And if you don't believe it, witness what happened in Iraq. So in a way, I think that green lights what we see going on in Yemen. I think the Saudis, when they declared their war, thought, well, if it works for the United States, it can work for us. And so we all have a big responsibility to listen for the screams of children who are awakened in the middle of the night by missiles tearing into their homes. Their screams as they try to flee and are gunned down by helicopter gunships, including United States helicopter gunships that have been attacking Yemen throughout these nightmarish years. We have a responsibility to listen for the gasps of children who essentially die by asphyxiation. When those little ones die because they suffer from malnutrition and then possibly the addition of cholera or dengue or COVID, those little ones essentially are strangulated. And so we're talking about the torture of children, 400,000 children. Bernie Sanders at least said it clearly, lift the blockade when there's a chance of 400,000 children being starved to death. They are being starved to death by policies enacted by the United States. Now, 2 months ago, President Biden seemed to be listening, and people who have worked very, very hard to make the United States government listen should take heart, because that did certainly seem to be the case. He announced that the United States would be stepping up our diplomacy to end the war in Yemen. He promised that the US would be ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen. But as they often say, the devil is in the details. And President Biden did not give then, and as of now, we still don't have specific details. We're now moving into the 7th year of bombing and blockade. And the war crimes continue with no end in sight. And also what's continuing are the profits of the war profiteers. The aerospace industry still has the upper hand in these discussions and a great deal of influence on congressional districts all across the United States. And also the enforcement of the blockade relies very much on United States weaponry. What kind of weaponry? Well, the coastline of Yemen could have been a resource-rich place. Imagine the fisheries. Imagine the importance of controlling the Bab el-Mandab, this crucial strait. Imagine the 3 ports through which the fuel and the food that's so desperately needed would normally pass. But how did the Saudis manage to close off that coastline? Well, one of the weapons they use is called a littoral combat ship. The Obama administration began selling exactly those ships, their weaponized ships that can go up along a coastline and control access in and out of that coast's ports. And then also they can control the desperate migrations that are happening because people are still trying to flee into Yemen from other nearby war zones. Well, those ships are now being manufactured in a shipyard in Marinette, Wisconsin. And I would have thought that that ship, which is armed to the teeth, would be considered an offensive weapon and that the contract would be canceled. But I went to the Marinette Shipyard's website and they noted with celebration last month that they've made and completed one ship, which I presume went sailing over to Saudi Arabia, and they're now starting work on the second of 4 ships that are all going to be sold to the Saudis. And of course, you know, the United States has said, well, we need the Marinette shipyard because it's constructing ships to defend people in the United States. Well, how is it defending people in the United States for these ships to be used to enforce the blockade against Yemen? Who profits from blockade and bombing? I'm talking to you from Chicago, where Boeing has its headquarters. And Boeing has a contract with the Saudis to manufacture 659 of these strategic land-air missiles extended response. These are grotesque, laser-guided missiles. And we were talking about the country of Yemen, where the Houthis have no air force, they have no air defense, and the Ansar Allah or Houthi control the place in Yemen where 80% of the population live. And so they are made victim to some of the most sophisticated and technologically vicious aerospace industry weapons created by Boeing, by Raytheon, by General Dynamics, by Lockheed Martin. And repeatedly, when people have collected the shards at the places where these missiles have hit, weddings, funerals, mosques, children's school buses, sewage and sanitation centers, farms, fisheries, repeatedly they've examined those shards and they can see the name of the United States company that supplied the missiles. So the United States could unilaterally end the Saudi capacity to continue the aerial bombing and the blockade. And be aware, please, that going forth from the United States ports, at least once a month, are ships that are loaded with these weapons that travel from the port of Baltimore and in Maryland, and also travel from in Wilmington, North Carolina. They depart. It would certainly be right to say that the war in Yemen has been one where there's been brutality exercised on all sides. To say that the Saudis are waging an inhumane, illegal war is not to say that the Houthis are to be declared, in a black and white sense, well, here are the good guys. The Houthis have also participated in blocking food from going forward, sometimes through imposing taxes, sometimes through blocking roads. But non-governmental organizations in Yemen, like Oxfam, have said that they are able to negotiate with the Houthi. And at any rate, it is their country. They live in that country. When the United States envoy, Mr. Lederking, or Mr. Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, say that the Houthi should start to match the eagerness of the Saudis and the Saudi-led coalition to bring an end to the war, it seems to me very disingenuous, because they place, and the UN does this as well, they place particular blame on the Houthi and understate the viciousness of the blockade and the aerial bombardments. And so when they say the Houthi have to stop cross-border raids, well, let's pause a moment and ask ourselves, wait a minute, who is engaging in cross-border raids when the United States on the other side of the planet is assisting in such direct ways the aerial bombardment and the blockade? The United Nations Security Council resolution that is still operative but terribly irrelevant is Resolution to 16. And this is something that was sort of rammed through by the Saudis years ago in 2016, when the Saudis didn't really think anybody was going to go along with it. And they did, much to the Saudis' surprise. And so this resolution is now still in place. And it essentially doesn't name the Saudis or the Saudi-led coalition, much less the United States and the United Kingdom and other weapons suppliers, as being among the warring parties. It particularly names the Houthis and basically would require the Houthis to surrender. Well, why would the Houthis do that at this point? They've got the upper hand in terms of the fighting on the ground, and it's very unlikely that they would acquiesce to a requirement of surrender that, in a sense, would almost be a prescription for genocide against the Houthis. And so we are still now looking at going into a 7th year of the war. And, you know, there is a wonderful group called Muatana, which campaigns for human rights amongst all the people within Yemen. And I want to call attention to a very brave report that they made, which I think gives us in the United States a particular insight into the mentality of the United States military. And this is a report that included exchanges of email that were gotten through an ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, a FOIA request. And it shows that in January of 2017, and forgive me for going what is backward in time, I know, but in January, the two generals, General Dunford and General Botel, had sought permission for Navy SEALs to engage in an operation in a small, remote, rural village in Yemen called Al-Ghayal. And they were sure they could, if they did a night raid, capture a high-value target with Al-Qaeda. Well, the generals got the permission, and one general wrote to the other, signing off with the okay, that the President of the United States has okayed it. We've got the executive order. And the last two lines of his email were, I'm sorry, the last two words were, good hunting. Good hunting. And that good hunting resulted in the deaths of 10 children under the age of 10 and 4 mothers in the village of Al-Ghayal. We have no right to be predators hunting Yemeni children and Yemeni families who mean no harm to people in the United States and pose no threat to United States security. So I'm begging everybody who's part of this call, let us contact elected representatives and insist that this gruesome and cruel and predatory war must come to an end as far as United States participation, support, and complicity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly, for that very real and very raw truth-telling. Just a reminder that if you do have questions for our speakers, please use the chat box. Our speakers are responding in real time. I think that's a great way to get our questions answered, because we're probably not going to have a Q&A session at the end, or maybe just time for 1 or 2 questions. Our last speaker of the evening is Hassan Al-Tayyab. Hassan Al-Tayyab is the Friends Committee on National Legislation's lead lobbyist on Middle East policy. He is also responsible for representing FCNL with various coalitions that work on these issues. He played a major role in the successful passage of the War Powers Resolution to end U.S. military aid to the Saudi-UAE coalition's war in Yemen. He will educate us on next steps, legislative goals, and activist strategies. Hassan?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Aisha and Kathy for your amazing presentations and your words. I just get goosebumps when I hear from you both, and I always learn something, and I really appreciate you. And I also appreciate everyone in Dallas here and in Texas that are coming to check this out and learn more about the Yemen war and what we can do to end it. There's a lot we can do. Now, there have been several policy shifts that have happened since the start of the Biden administration. I think it's worth touching on a few, because there have been a few things that have been going in the right direction, including Biden's lifting of the FTO designation on the Houthis. And that was imposed at the last minute by Donald Trump, unfortunately, and that would have blocked humanitarian aid to all parts of Yemen. The new administration has, moved to halt U.S. military participations in weapon sales, in offensive operations. But as Kathy said, we don't really have a lot of clarity on what the difference between offensive weapons and defensive weapons mean. And we really need that clarity. We also don't have a lot of answers about the blockade. One other thing I think is worth mentioning is that the Biden administration has appointed a new envoy to Yemen to help with the peace process, Tim Lenderking. But really, if the Biden administration's serious about stepping up diplomacy to end the war in Yemen, more must be done. And an urgent first step right now is for the Biden administration to call on Saudi Arabia and press on them with diplomatic leverage and everything they can do right now to call for an unconditional and immediate lifting of the blockade on Yemen. And that is just absolutely critical. David Beasley from the World Food Program has said that the blockade needs to be lifted as a humanitarian act. Right now in Congress, there is a letter that closed technically at 5 o'clock today Eastern, but I've heard that they can take sign-ons even as early as tomorrow morning. And it's a letter from members of Congress to the Biden administration urging that they call on Saudi to lift the blockade for the sake of millions of Yemenis living, experiencing starvation, and millions of Yemenis that are knocking at the door of starvation. So it's really critical that we build support for this. I will say that one of your representatives, Eddie Bernice Johnson, is on board with the letter, so you certainly can thank them for that. But Rep. Allred has not signed, and they need to be pressured. And there are several other Texas representatives that have not signed either. So they really need to hear from constituents. We've set up a link at FCNL, endtheblockade.com. If somebody wants to put that in the chat, that's going to really help you generate an automatic email to your member of Congress and let them know that you do not support the blockade on Yemen and that you want them to do everything they can to speak out against it. So highly encourage folks to do that. There's going to be a big release tomorrow. At the same time, I'd also flag that FCNL and Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation have led an org and celebrity letter. It's got 75 or so organizations, national organizations from all around the country, calling for an end to the blockade. And it was also signed by several celebrities, including Mark Ruffalo, the directors of the Oscar-nominated film Hunger Ward, and a bunch of others, including, I always like to call out Orlando Bloom. I think he's a great actor. He also played Legolas in Lord of the Rings. He wants to end the blockade on Saudi. Okay, so I think that's really important. I don't think Aisha got that joke. I don't know if she's seen the Lord of the Rings, but that's okay. So this is so critical that we put all this pressure, and even if your member doesn't sign the letter, they need to hear from you and they need to make their own public statement. So that's our number one goal right now. Number two, though, I think is really important. It also deals with the blockade, and Kathy spoke brilliantly about it, and it's UN Security Council Resolution 2216, and this is an essential next step for peace negotiations, is to replace this outdated template for diplomacy. And, like Kathy said, the resolution was drafted by the Saudi coalition, and it provided international legitimacy for its military campaign and the blockade. But 6 years into the war, the Houthis now control 80% of the country. And 2216 is really outdated and, arguably was never a good template for diplomacy. And it called for the Houthis to immediately and unconditionally withdraw their forces. And the Saudis, seized on this resolution in their ceasefire proposal demanding that the Houthis give up their weapons and abandon their territory, after 6 years of airstrikes and blockade. Just not really a feasible solution, and we need to find another path. What we're trying to do at FCNL is decouple this blockade from ongoing negotiations that we really don't we don't know what's going to happen, whether there's going to be, continued escalations in Marib, in Taz, more airstrikes in Sana'a. We just don't have a lot of intel. We don't have a lot of leverage over that, but we do have leverage over the Saudi-led coalition, and Yemenis should not be used as leverage. Starvation should never be used as leverage, and food should never be weaponized in the way it's being weaponized right now. And like it was mentioned before, for several months now, no fuel has been allowed in through Hodeidah port. And now hospitals can only operate for sometimes even an hour a day, and that's just unacceptable to me. In this, under the Biden administration, this is completely unacceptable, and we need to speak out. But on top of just calling out the blockade, we really need to replace this template for diplomacy. I think it's worth mentioning specifically Section 15 of the UN Security Council resolution that states that says member states, in particular states neighboring to Yemen, it allows them to inspect all cargo to Yemen in their territory, including seaports and airports, and it's been used as that justification. And as a result, we've seen, mass famine and death. It's unconscionable, and that's exactly what we need to do. That's what we're working on at FCNL. So after we get through this week or two of really just piling on the blockade, and I urge everyone to make tweets, call everybody they know, share the endtheblockade.com link. Make sure their members are tweeting about it. Even if they sign the letter, they can do a tweet. Eddie Bernice Johnson should be encouraged to tweet the link of the release when Dingle puts it up on the website. I forgot to mention that Reps Dingle, Kana, and Pocan are leading the effort, and I'm really grateful for that. So that's our goal. And then after that, we're going to be working with members to try to call on Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, to push for a new UN Security Council resolution. And what we're saying is that it's just got to allow for the warring parties to engage in dialogue in a more even playing field. And the resolution needs to call for an immediate end to, the war, a nationwide ceasefire that includes ending the blockade, conducting an inclusive peace process with the Houthis at the table, but also Yemeni civil society, and especially women and girls. We need an end to humanitarian obstruction by all parties. It's happening by the Houthis. It's happening by the Hadi government. It's happening with the STC. But, my main message for members of Congress when they bring up obstruction, I say, well, the blockade is really the root cause of obstruction. So you want to address that? Certainly do it diplomatically, but also end the blockade and end the root cause. Lastly, the UN Security Council resolution, the replacement one that we want, would call for the international community to stop military support and weapon sales to all parties of the conflict. And this is going to be key for, the U.S. can end our support, and we're, granted, there's some questions there still, but we also need to pressure the UK, France, Canada, and others to end their military support as well. And that's one key way we can put pressure on them to do that. So, this is the need for this new UN Security Council resolution has been highlighted by U.S. lawmakers and policy experts. It's and there's a lot of momentum for it. Former UN envoy Jamal Ben Omar also called for this, and he was the UN envoy to Yemen back in 2015. He wrote recently in an op-ed, and I'm going to quote him, "Today, this unworkable accident remains the basis for all the mediation pursued by the UN. The past 6 years show it failed. The first task of American diplomacy must be to replace the template. Washington should promote a new UN Security Council resolution providing a different structure for a negotiated process that ensures a seat for every side in the conflict." And I want to end my presentation there because I think those are just such powerful words. I encourage people to read that amazing op-ed. take a quick action. I wrote, if you want more background information, I did just publish an article in Just Security, and I really appreciate Samina for putting that in the chat. Look forward to your questions and look forward to working with everybody here on ending this war once and for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Hassan. That was very informative. With our part of our remaining time, I want to invite Sumbul Aurangzeb. She's the district project coordinator in the office of Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson to say a few words. Sumbul?
She's on mute. She's muted.
We'll give her a second.
Okay, now everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, good evening. Thank you so much for letting me take part in this event. I was just listening to all of the speakers, and this has been such an informative panel, and on such an important topic. Congresswoman Johnson unfortunately couldn't be here, but I thought I could just hop on for a little bit and let you know about some of her efforts on this issue. The conflict in Yemen is something that's been on her radar since 2017, and she has been involved since then, trying to do whatever it was that she could to bring attention to what's happening and to try and prevent the hostilities that have been ongoing. She signed on to 4 different resolutions calling on the immediate removal of United States armed forces from hostilities in Yemen. That was during the 115th Congress, the 116th Congress. Actually, I think there were 2 in each. And then last week, she signed on to various letters. And last week, our previous speaker was talking about how there was a letter by Representative Dingell. So Congresswoman signed on to that as well, calling on the Biden administration to take a tougher stance against the government of Saudi Arabia and their blockade of Yemen, which is preventing food, water, medicine, etc., from reaching the civilians caught in the conflict. And last year, when Secretary Pompeo said that he wanted to cut aid to Yemen due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Congresswoman signed on to a letter urging him to reconsider that decision as well. Congresswoman, this is one of the many conflict zones that she is concerned about. And we do have constituents and different organizations reach out to our office asking her to support such initiatives, and we do. And if there's anything else that you'd like for her office to do, please just let us know. I'm sure she'll be tweeting about that latest letter, and yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That's good to hear.
Mhm.
Unfortunately for us, we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to ask the one question that just came in the chat. It's probably because I think it's an important place for us to leave this conversation. And I think maybe Hassan, you could answer to this, or Sumbul, you might be able to shed some light. But the question is, do we know why Congressman VC and Congressman Allred have not signed on? Do we have any insight into what is preventing them?
I haven't gotten a direct response from them. I do appreciate that it's a very busy time on Capitol Hill, as a lot of staffers will let you know. And we just need to get more constituents, I think, engaged in reaching out, and anything maybe Representative Bernice Johnson could do to, reach out. I don't know if there's a pre-existing relationship. As far as I know, it might not even be an issue with the content of the letter, although that certainly could be a possibility. I don't know. I wish I could say more.
So follow up, is this something we would set up meetings with representatives to lobby them as their constituents?
Absolutely. I think direct lobbying and building a relationship with your member of Congress is absolutely critical. And, maybe they don't sign this particular letter, but we could work with them on their own personal statement, or they could do a statement to the Biden administration. They could do a tweet series. I think, there's a lot of room for engagement here, and it's all hands on deck moment.
So I think we're going to conclude the program, but as I'm saying my concluding remarks, if our speakers want to put their Twitter handles in the chat, we could try to get a little bit of a tweet storm going this week, if that would help coordinate some efforts. And any participants who want to put their Twitter handles in the chat, we could start following each other and do some action.
I love that. I just would encourage people to use the endtheblockade.com if they want to get others to take action using hashtags like hashtag Yemen can't wait or hashtag end the blockade. They can all be great. I definitely encourage everyone to follow Kathy Kelly and Aisha. And if you can, try to kick in a few bucks to Aisha's work. YemenFoundation.org. I did a Kickstarter for them earlier in the year, and it made me feel great. And I think it's going to make you feel great too if you kick in a few bucks. I'm just saying.
Great. I think that's a great way to end this program.
Samina,
Thank you all for joining us.
Samina, I had a question.
Okay.
Sort of a point of privilege. This is a question directed to Hassan. How important? I know you've talked about this before, but how important do you think is local advocacy? How important it is for us here in Texas to be reaching out to our members of Congress, particularly the friendlies, the Democratic. I know in this group we have access to Sheila Lee Jackson, we have access to Al Green, we have access to other Democratic members of Congress. How you guys are doing work, FCNL is doing work at the national level. How important of a role do you think local advocates like us, and I'm pretty much a local, politics is local type of a guy. How important is that piece, do you think, in the work that we are all doing?
I have to say that it is absolutely incredible. Local advocates around the country doing the work that they're doing. And that's the only reason why, in my opinion, we were able to end U.S. support for offensive operations for the war in the first place. Kathy Kelly just popped something in the chat about there's a hunger strike going on in D.C. right now, led by the Yemeni liberation movement. And there's a backstory that I wanted to bring up. It's Yemeni led. They're amazing young activists. The main leader of the organization, her name's Iman, and her representative is Debbie Dingell, and she got Debbie Dingell to lead this blockade letter, and now she's doing this advocacy. So that is just so powerful. I could say story after story about how this direct advocacy really works, and building relationships, having those lobby visits and lobbying your member of Congress, but also building some coalitions and doing events like these and inviting your members of Congress. Absolutely critical right now. And it's just not being done enough. And I'm so grateful that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and making your voices heard and getting the word out. And we should just keep going.
If everyone's up for it, we could take a couple more questions. We could take them if you want to unmute your mic.
I just want to say I'm really, really grateful to Friends Committee on National Legislation, Hassan Tayyab, to Kathy Kelly. Oh my God, she's one of our heroes here in Dallas. She has been here many, many times. We have been working with Kathy Kelly since the late 1990s during the sanctions on Iraq. We are grateful to Dr. Jumaan for what she's doing for the people of for Yemen. There are an amazing number of people of goodwill here in North Texas. And I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, for educating us, for inspiring us to carry on this work of advocacy to make a more peaceful and just world. And Dr. Jumaan, my heart bleeds. I hurt so much for the people of Yemen, just like as I did, I told Kathy Kelly how we hurt for the people of Iraq 20 years ago or so. It's just overwhelming stuff, but I'm grateful to all the people who are on in this meeting. These are long-term committed people whose heart just beats for people that they have no connection with. As a Muslim, as a Pakistani, when I started the work for Iraq, I was just impressed with Lon Barnum and Joyce Hall and Bill Maxwell and Diane Baker and Don Dillard, all these folks that have no connection with Iraq or Yemen, but yet they care. They care for people that they have no blood relationship with, they have no connection with, but just on the level of humanity, they connect, and they've encouraged me and Aftab Siddiqui, my colleague here on the program, to work for bringing changing U.S. policy, for confronting U.S. militarism. This has been going on for so long now, and we are so hopeful that Biden will reset our policy in the Middle East, and we'll stop bleeding in the Middle East. We'll stop dying in the Middle East. Our children in the Middle East will look forward to a future for themselves and for their families. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this work and for inspiring us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samina.
Oh, I'm beyond honored to be your little moderator MC for the evening. It's been a very inspiring and informative, very passionate teaching going on tonight. Can't thank y'all, and y'all are the ones doing the heavy lifting. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for our speakers? And if not, we'll thank them heartily from the bottom of our hearts for giving up your time and over the years.
Thank you, Kathy.
Everyone's muted, so you can't hear their applause. Here,
It's an honor to be with you. Thank you.
You can unmute yourself and applaud.
All right, everybody unmute.
I haven't felt this much love in a while. The calls in DC aren't this friendly. No.
Kathy, come back to Dallas and visit us.
Oh, I can't wait. I really want to do that.
We miss you here. We love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the last times Kathy was here, she stayed at my house. Remember, Kathy? It was a lot of years ago.
It's one of the most hospitable places you can ever stay. And a big shout out to Mavis Belle Isle, because the first time I went to Texas, I stayed with Mavis.
Yeah.
And Diane Baker, how lovely to see you. Goodness.
Kathy.
I want to hear from Valley Reed. Valley Reed, can you say something?
Well, it's wonderful to see Kathy and hear valuable information that can light and inspire us to take action. And I'm greatly appreciative of what you all are doing. And of course, everything that you have been doing. Everyone, thank you.
How about Diane Baker? She's our resident angel here.
You know, every evening I say a prayer for our friend Kathy, Bob. And we have so many friends that are working for building bridges and knocking down blockades. They are immoral and illegal all over the world. And we need these stories. We need to hear the stories that you all are telling us.
Thank you, Diane. Gloria, would you like to say a few words for us? Gloria is our colleague down in Houston.
I appreciate Hadi you and letting me know about this event. I think I'm the only non-Dallas person here, but we certainly here in Houston need to talk to people like Sheila Jackson Lee. My congressperson is Sylvia Garcia, but we also need to confront Ted Cruz and John Cornyn.
Yes.
I don't know what's wrong with them, but I guess they're just part of US imperialism that we've got to smash. And Diane, are you the same Diane that was on the Pastors for Peace call the other night?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Nice to see you again.
Diane is busted. Can we hear from Lon Barnum, Aftab Siddiqui before we sign out?
All I've got to say is that old mantra about education, research, action. So we need to plan those congressional office visits and raise some money to help the situation. And we'll talk more about that by email later.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would like some more information specifically about the letter you're referring to that Allred has not signed on to.
Yeah, Allred has not signed on to the letter, and if you can go to endtheblockade.com, you can generate an automatic email. Any constituent of Allred can generate an automatic email on that.
I have the letter and I can send it to you, Joyce.
And I would certainly encourage follow-up action if they don't end up signing, doing an LTE or doing an op-ed, putting something out there, meeting with those members just to say, hey, what's going on? Why didn't you sign on to this letter? We'd like some clarification. What is it about the Saudi blockade that makes you feel warm and fuzzy? We got to know. And I just put a little note in the chat. I don't know if you all knew this, but nearly all Saudi jet mechanics actually train in Texas at Shepherd's Air Force Base. And that's I found that out through some weird digging. I have a FOIA request out for this particular program, but I think there could be a lot of in-state and Texas mobilizing on that particular base to say, why are we still supporting jet mechanics when these planes are flying over Yemen and blowing up school buses? Shepherd's Air Force Base is in Thornberry's old district, or Thornberry retired, but it's in that district in Texas, I guess in Northwest Texas. This is what I do with my Saturday evenings, is I look this stuff up. So
it's actually in Wichita Falls, which is 2 hours northwest of Fort Worth.
Yeah. So something else to consider is that in your own backyard, these jet mechanics are getting trained and then going to Saudi Arabia to work on the F-15s that are flying over Yemen right now.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. This is Aftab Siddiqui, and it's a wonderful program, frankly speaking. Heartbreaking news from Yemen. But Hadi, I have a question for you. The letter that you forwarded for me to talk to Mark Vesey about, is it the same one that we are talking about?
That is the same letter that Hassan Tayyab referred to, yes.
Okay, so I will definitely forward it to Mark Vesey.
Yeah, Mark Vesey, Sheila Lee Jackson, all of the ones that we have access to, let us please call them tomorrow and say, please sign on to this letter. It's a really small ask. It's not asking for a lot. All you're asking is them to ask Biden to pressure Saudi Arabia to lift the blockade so we can deliver some humanitarian aid, for crying out loud. It's a small ask. It's not a high bar of any kind. Oh, Gloria, I can send you the letter. I've got the letter. Okay. I think everybody has spoken. Mavis, did you want to say something, or anybody else? Patricia?
Adi, could you send me the letter?
Yes, I will. Okay, Samina, you want to thank everybody?
Yeah, Hadi, I have a question for Gloria. I need to talk to her about the Iran issue for Gloria, what's her name? Sylvia Garcia has been opposing talks with Iran, and I would really like to connect with you off the line. So.
Well, Hassan made a great reference to the Lord of the Rings, and I see that the fellowship here is going to create some good works. as we work together doing our very small part to combat a very big evil in the world. I'm so grateful to our speakers, to Hassan Al-Tayyib at Friends National Committee on Legislation, to Ms. Kathy Kelly for joining us, and to Dr. Aisha Jumaan, who all of them brought such a wealth of expertise and knowledge, and we really benefited. I personally learned more about Yemen in the last hour than I think I've known my entire life. So it's been a great evening in that respect. So I'm looking forward to future actions that come from this evening. As Lon Burnham mentioned, it's all about what we are going to do with the information that we got here tonight. And I want to thank our coalition partners again, Amnesty International Dallas, Pax Christi Dallas, Peace Mennonite Church Dallas, and the SMU Human Rights Program and Kinder USA. So thanks to our speakers, thanks to our coalition partners, thanks to each and every one of you for attending, because there's no more important work on this earth than alleviating human suffering. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Samina.
Good night, everybody.